Space doesn't usually sound like anything, but that night it did. Not to our ears, no air up there, but through the tremors in station hulls, the eerie flicker of warning sirens, and the raw silence of a billion people holding their breath. That was the night the Dominion arrived in Seoul, and the sky broke wide open. It started with shadows. Not the kind the sun casts, but jagged moving ones, hundreds of them, drifting across the orbital lanes. One by one, enormous shapes bled into existence out of the black. They weren't elegant like the ships you'd see in movies, all sleek lines and glowing drives. Numbered Dominion warcraft looked like slabs of punishment, hull plating stacked like layered bones, guns jutting out in ugly ridges. 40 system crackers, 600 escorts. That's what rolled in around Earth. 40 ships the size of mountains, each one capable of cracking open a planet's crust and boiling its seas into vapor. The escorts filled the gaps like a steel noose, making sure nothing got out and nothing got in. Humanity wasn't being visited, it was being caged. Commander Duran Veylan watched them arrive from the forward canopy of the Revenant, Earth's so-called flagship. He wasn't a tall man, not the booming voice type of leader, but he had eyes that never blinked when bad news came. His face barely moved as the tactical display spat out numbers that made the junior officers go pale. 40 system crackers confirmed, escorts still counting, Ensign O'Malley whispered, his voice cracking halfway. Valen didn't raise his tone. He never had to. Then stop counting. We know what they're here for. No one laughed. Down below in orbit, civilian stations flickered alive with desperate comms chatter. Cargo freighters begged for clearance to jump out system. Families on habitat rings screamed about boarding pods that weren't launching. Children cried into microphones, asking if their parents were coming back. The Dominion didn't wait for anyone's permission to attack. The first strike hit an old O'Neill cylinder above Mars orbit. One shot, just one, cut through its spine like someone snapping a stick. You didn't hear explosions in space, but you could see them. A silent shiver, then a blinding spray of frozen atmosphere. Lights going out section by section. 20,000 colonists lived there. Lived. On Earth, night skies lit up as streaks of fire crossed the stratosphere. Debris rained down like shooting stars, only these weren't the kind you wished on. People crowded on rooftops, craning their necks, trying to understand what was falling on them. The news anchors kept stuttering, orbital malfunction, until even they realized there was no lie big enough to cover what was happening. Inside the Revenant's war room, the crew held their posts, knuckles white against consoles. A young lieutenant whispered, "It's over." "There's no way." Valen cut him off with a look sharper than any blade. "Number, it's only started, and we're not done." The Dominion thought this would be clean. Sweep in, crack a few habitats, and force humanity to bend the knee. To them, Sol wasn't a fight. It was paperwork, another system added to their empire ledger. But they didn't understand Earth. They didn't understand humans. We weren't an empire polished and ordered like theirs. We were messy, stubborn, half broke, and half ready. But that made us mean when cornered. Still, in those first minutes, it didn't feel like defiance. It felt like panic. Orbital workers abandoned rigs, pushing escape pods into blind trajectories. Families scrambled down habitat corridors, some trampling neighbors in the crush to get to docking bays. Even hardened Marines looked at the size of those system crackers and muttered prayers they hadn't said since childhood. On Europa, miners shut down drills mid-shift and climbed to the surface domes, staring up at the stars as fire rained down in the distance. One old miner spat in the snow and muttered, "Guess they finally came for us." The sheer scale of it hit like a gut punch. For years, everyone knew the Dominion was out there. Radio whispers, intercepted probes, a battle or two at the edge of mapped space. But those stories felt distant, somebody else's nightmare. That night, distance vanished. This wasn't theory. It was happening, right in Earth's front yard. The Revenant shook as shockwaves rippled from a nearby orbital habitat, shattering apart. The command deck lights flickered, and for a heartbeat, the crew thought it was their own death arriving. But the hull held, and Valen just squared his shoulders. "Get me visuals on the lead system cracker," he said, steady as a stone. The display zoomed in. The alien behemoth filled the screen, its hull covered in jagged ridges and glowing glyphs. Gun ports rotated lazily, like a predator stretching its jaws before the bite. It wasn't even rushing. That was the insult. It moved like it had all the time in the world. Someone behind Valen swore under their breath. Another muttered, "We can't fight that." Valen didn't blink. His voice stayed calm, almost conversational. "We can, because we don't have a choice." And that was it. That was the moment. The pivot between despair and defiance. Humanity realized in one heartbeat that surrender wasn't on the menu. Survive or die. Nothing in between. Down on Earth, whole cities watched the sky burn and felt something shift in their bones. Old rivalries didn't matter. Borders didn't matter. Nobody cared about the flags anymore. It was just us, the species, and the monsters who thought they could break us. In the shelters, kids clung to parents, asking if the soldiers would protect them. On freighters fleeing toward the asteroid belt, captains whispered to their crews about fallback caches they weren't supposed to know existed. Somewhere under Luna's surface, men and women were already cracking open silos sealed for 50 years, wiping dust off weapons that had never been acknowledged. But in that first chapter of the war, none of that mattered yet. All anyone could see was the fire, habitats burning, orbitals falling, Earth caught in a noose of alien steel. The Dominion had come, and the sky had broken, and Commander Duran Valen, standing grim and unflinching on the bridge of the Revenant, became the man who would either hold that broken sky together or go down with it. The Dominion wanted this to be paperwork, clip the pen, stamp the planet, move on. They didn't see the bones under our skin. Valen stood on the Revenant's bridge with the same quiet fury he'd worn since the first habitat went dark. "Wake the old work," he said. That was all. No speech, no pep talk, just a sentence that hit every buried switch from Earth to the ice line. Under Luna's gray, sleepy face, dust the color of ash began to slide. What tourists called collapsed mine galleries flexed like lungs. Hatches that hadn't moved in 50 years cracked their seals and bled vacuum. Inside, men in faded coveralls, names like Pike, Drust, Harbin, pulled tarps off machines that were older than they were. They weren't pretty. Nothing about the contingency was pretty. The lunar mass drivers were gigantic tubes bolted into bedrock, coils stacked like vertebrae, barrels sunk along lava tubes so deep you felt the weight of the moon sit on your chest if you stood too long. Their crews ran gloved hands across cold copper, whispering to it like an old dog they weren't sure would still hunt. "Power?" Pike asked, because even when the sky's breaking, you still ask the same dumb question first. Drust slapped a panel, and the coils woke one by one, little green eyes opening down a spine that stretched for kilometers. "Hungry," he said. "She's real hungry." They fed her. Old reactor bunkers coughed to life, backed by new capacitor banks hidden inside museum tunnels no tourist ever got to see. The first slug, just a test round, sat in a cradle like a coffin, a hunk of tungsten dense enough to make a god grunt. The loader arm lifted, the rail groaned, and for the first time in a long time, the moon remembered what it had been built to do. Out at L4 and L5, the dead stations flickered. Everyone called them mothballs. Faded O'Neill rings and skeletal shipyards supposedly abandoned when budgets died and politics turned sour. That was the cover. Beneath the rust were capacitor spines, sensor needles, and decoy beacons wrapped in the soft static that mining rigs throw off by the ton. The trick wasn't invisibility. It was looking so boring for so long that no one bothered to look twice. Down in the belt, rock huggers in patch suits clipped power lines onto rigs that wore a dozen fake serial numbers. They booted emitters that jittered on purpose. Dirty signatures, uneven. Curves, the kind of reactor noise that makes a professional sneer and move on. Those rigs had waited 100 quiet years to be underestimated. Today was their payday. "Dominion scouts on approach," O'Malley said, keeping his voice level with two fingers white around his console. "Let them," Valen answered. He watched the swarm slide past the moon and break toward the belt like neat little arrows in a textbook. The scouts came in confident, noses up, drives bright. They skimmed the old yards and the mining rigs and the dead rings and logged everything with cool, contemptuous eyes. A wing peeled toward Luna, lazy as a Sunday flyover. You could almost hear them snort. A few retrofitted coil guns, a handful of outdated destroyers, some rusted stations. Noise, litter, a species playing soldier. One of their officers, another slick, bejeweled imperial type who'd never done a hard thing with his hands, toggled his mic and laughed. "They hoard scrap," he said in his language, the words dripping. "We left the slop bucket out and called it a fleet." He wasn't wrong about the slop. He was wrong about the bucket. On the far side of Luna, a wall labeled Survey Cold Room slid on rails. A man named Harbin, wiry, gray around the temples, knuckles mashed like he'd fought more engines than people, jammed a pry bar under a panel and popped it free. Behind it, cables as thick as his leg hummed. "You really sure about waking all of it?" he asked, not looking at the officer beside him. The officer was just a man in a plain jacket with a tired face and a barcode scar on his wrist. Duran Valan didn't wear rank when he went below. He looked at the cables like they were old enemies he respected. "We paid for these bones," he said. "Time to use them." They walked past plaques stamped with names no one said out loud anymore. Programs buried under bankruptcies, shells of agencies that had died on the front page, projects repurposed until they became rumors. The contingency wasn't one plan. It was a century and a half of stubborn little plans that refused to stay dead. Cold War toys, corporate pet projects, militia dreams, academic proofs, each too small to matter alone, each designed to survive a round of cuts, then another, then 5 more. At Europa, men in ice dust boots trudged down spiral ramps cut into blue glass. The mining pits weren't just pits. They were vaults with doors thick as bank safes, hinges greased once a decade by a priesthood of engineers who never called themselves that. Behind those doors sat frames big enough to be cathedrals, skeletal hulls ribbed with conduits, lights dead, names stenciled and painted over and stenciled again until the letters blurred. "Not today," said Soren Vask, foreman, hand on a wheel he'd been forbidden to spin for 20 years. His crew nodded. They knew the script. The ice ship slept a little longer. Later they'd rise, the ice would break, but not yet. Above Earth, the first real proof that the Dominion had missed the point screamed past a scout wing. An abandoned service lattice along an old habitat ring suddenly unfolded like a flower. What had been masts and bracing arms flexed into point defense nets. Low power, but precise. The kind that swats drones like gnats. It didn't win anything. It didn't even kill a ship. It just worked in a place the Dominion thought had been cleaned. Valan felt the smallest corner of his mouth twitch. "Blind spot," he said softly, not to anyone in particular. "We couldn't hide everything, so we hid it in boredom." The scouts logged the anomalies and still dismissed them, because arrogance is cheaper than caution when you think you're immortal. Their analysts tagged Luna as a decommissioned threat. Their captains rolled their eyes at jittery signatures in the belt. Their formation barely flexed. Valan keyed the channel down to Luna. "Pike, how's my girl?" "She's a bastard," Pike said, fond as a man is to a wreck that still runs. "Coils hot, rails aligned. You want to tap?" "Not yet," Valan replied. His eyes never left the giant killers ringed around Earth. "Spin the flywheels, charge the banks, on my mark." He cut the line and stood still long enough to feel the hum in the deck. The Revenant wasn't fresh either. Nothing here was. But everything had a job, and every job had a consequence. Fire too early, and you burn your reveal on scouts whose funerals won't even slow the Armada. Fire too late, and they cut another habitat in half on camera. O'Malley swallowed. "Sir, what if the coils arc? We haven't run them this hot in longer than you've been alive," Valan finished. "Yes, and we kept them anyway, because we knew this day was coming." He stepped closer to the forward canopy. The lead system cracker slid past, vast and slow, that arrogant glide of a butcher who hasn't met a door he couldn't kick in. Valan pictured the beam path in his head, the timing between Luna's horizon and the monster's turn rate, the drag of a slug at 80 kilometers per second. He pictured the second shot and the third, because the first never solved anything on its own. "Bring the decoys up a notch," he said. "Dirty. Make them argue with their own scopes." In the belt, beacons stuttered. One rayed like a cruiser with a lazy engineer, another like a destroyer bleeding a reactor seal, a third threw heat the way a carrier does when it's running heavy flights. Sloppy, inconsistent, exactly wrong in the ways real life is wrong. The Dominion's algorithms flagged the mess, triaged it, and, by design, kicked it down a priority queue that ended with the label, "Investigate when convenient." Convenient wasn't coming. A tremor ran through the Revenant as debris kissed the hull and skidded away. Another habitat died somewhere out of sight. The command deck went very quiet. O'Malley's hands hovered. "Sir?" Valen let himself breathe once. Slow. "Knock, knock," he murmured. "Let's see if the moon still remembers." He keyed Luna. "On my mark," he said again, like the first time hadn't counted. 3, 2. Down in the lava tube, Drust's thumb found the firing stud. Pike's jaw flexed. Somewhere behind them, a little radio played static because no one had the heart to shut it off. E1. They didn't hear the shot. They felt it. Through bedrock, through ribs, through teeth. The coil spine grabbed the slug and hurled it down the dark with a violence that had nothing to do with sound. The rails flashed white. The air crackled. Every hair on every arm stood up. The moon kicked just a little, like it had coughed. Valen watched the lead system cracker cross the predicted line and lifted one finger like a conductor finishing a bar. The tactical overlay winked. Tiny, neat, and he almost smiled. Bones, he thought. You still got them. The slug was already on its way. The moon sneezed, and the galaxy took notice. That tungsten slug slammed into the lead system cracker before its crew even knew someone had pulled a trigger. No shields, no evasive maneuvers, no clever counter, just a blunt rock riding rails faster than most of their computers could clock. The impact didn't look like fire at first. It looked like a star just blinked wrong. Then the whole forward third of the ship peeled off like fruit rind under a knife. The second shot came half a heartbeat later. That one went clean through a destroyer running escort, straight down its spine, and the blast vented crew and atmosphere in a single ugly jet. By the time the Dominion commander's brain registered hostile fire, his front line was already short 3 ships and bleeding debris across half the screen. On the Revenant, O'Malley let out something between a laugh and a sob. Christ almighty, it actually worked. "Don't celebrate," Valen cut in, his voice so flat it killed the moment. "They'll learn." And he was right. Dominion formations were arrogant, not stupid. They jerked into tighter clusters almost immediately, armor plating rolling, escorts overlapping like a living wall. Their system crackers, those big ugly planet killers, shuffled to the rear, covered like royalty. But the damage was done. The first spark was lit, because while Luna coughed tungsten, the belt lit up like a Christmas tree from hell. Every beacon Pike's people had scattered, every fake reactor noise the miners had rigged, every dead rig that had been quietly welded with shrapnel canisters, they all woke up at once. The Dominion's tactical net howled with ghost signatures. Carriers that weren't there. Cruisers that read like they were leaking plasma but somehow didn't move. A whole squadron of phantom corvettes darting in tight circles. And then the mines began to sing. They weren't elegant mines, no stealth tech, no self-replicating nanobots, no sci-fi nonsense. Just canisters of ball bearings and iron rods strapped to coil casings. When a Dominion scout wing blundered into one of those clouds, it looked like someone had fed them into a blender. Armor cracked, engines sheared, and comms filled with the kind of static no one wants to hear twice. "Jesus," whispered Drust from Luna's pit crew, watching feeds come through. "That one didn't even fire back. Just gone." The truth was simpler. Humanity hadn't built elegant weapons. They'd built angry ones, and angry was enough. Across the network, chatter turned manic. Orbital workers screamed as they huddled in shelters, listening to the thrum of railguns echo through rock. Belt miners howled into their mics like wolves, calling shots and laughing too loud. Even back on Earth, where most of the world couldn't see more than fire in the sky, families in bunkers started whispering to each other. "We hit them. We actually hit them." That was the shift no Dominion admiral had factored in. They hadn't just faced resistance. They'd forced humanity to prove it could fight. On the flagship Vorun's Pride, the Dominion commander finally cut his private feed. His mandibles clicked once, sharp and angry, before he barked orders down the chain. Titan, burn the rats out. Prepare bombardment solutions. In Dominion doctrine, bombardment wasn't meant for war, it was meant for messages. Smash a few habitats, cook a city under its dome, and watch morale collapse. It had worked 100 times before against 100 little races. Why wouldn't it work now? Except as his gunners plotted trajectories, their scopes still twitched with ghosts. Carriers that weren't carriers. Destroyers that didn't exist. The belt itself breathing like it had a pulse. Do you believe any of this mess? One gunner hissed to another. Doesn't matter, his mate muttered. Orders are clear. Back on the Revenant, Valen leaned over the tactical plot, calm as stone. They're scared enough to clump, angry enough to burn. Good, makes them predictable. You sound like you planned this, O'Malley said, voice dry. Valen didn't look at him. Because we did. And that was the whole ugly truth. Humanity hadn't been naive. They hadn't assumed peace forever. They just buried their claws so deep in junkyards and ice pits that no one believed they existed. Now, with sparks flying and Dominion blood in the water, the claws were out. The Dominion's answer came hard. One squadron peeled off and lit its drives for bombardment, angling toward the orbital rings around Earth. Their cannons spooled, the kind of firepower that could glass a habitat in seconds. Valen's jaw tightened. So it begins, he muttered. In Luna's coil pits, Pike cracked his neck and set the next slug. Guess we find out if the old girl can sprint. The coils howled again, and sparks of tungsten fury screamed into the dark. This wasn't theory anymore. This wasn't simulations or drills or backroom contingency chatter. This was the first fight for Earth, and the first sparks had just caught. The Dominion didn't waste time licking their wounds. The moment those first mines and rail slugs drew blood, they came back with the only thing they trusted: fire from above. The sky over Earth wasn't a sky anymore. It was a lid of flame. From the ground, people said it looked like the stars were weeping fire. First one streak, then a dozen, then a whole rain of them. They weren't shooting at military targets anymore. They were shooting at us. The habitats that had hung proud over Earth for a century. O'Neill cylinders, little clusters of spinning rings where whole families lived and worked, cracked open like glass jars under a hammer. On the comnets, the screaming started. Station L4 just vented. They've got people still inside. They're firing on the rings. God, the rings are breaking apart. My daughter's still up there. Valen stood in the Revenant's command pit, jaw locked, hands behind his back, while the tactical hollows lit up with one red blip after another. Each blip wasn't just a structure, it was lives. Thousands, gone in seconds. Behind him, O'Malley slammed a fist against his console so hard the display flickered. We can't just sit here, Commander. For God's sake, look at them. We've got guns, we've got teeth. Let's hit back. Even Pike, grizzled and calm as he usually was, growled low from Luna's coil pit. One more salvo, I can gut their bombardment wing. Just give me the nod. But Valen didn't nod, didn't even turn. Not yet, he said. The bridge went dead quiet, except for the hum of systems and the distant chatter of comms officers listening to whole habitats die. Not yet, O'Malley barked. His voice cracked, half fury, half disbelief. You want to watch them butcher civvies while we wait for some damn grand plan to line up? What's the point of hiding claws if you won't use them? Valen finally turned, and when he did, his eyes were cold enough to freeze steel. If we lunge now, they tighten. They'll know the railguns aren't ghosts. They'll know the mines aren't luck. They'll know exactly what we have and exactly where to hit back. Every second we hold, every life we lose, buys the chance to kill them in one blow instead of scratching them bloody. He let the silence hang for a breath, then added, voice quieter, and yes, I know what that costs. On the feeds, the costs stacked fast. Habitat after habitat sheared apart, whole city sectors, inside them venting atmosphere. Fire blossomed where oxygen met wreckage. Colonists huddled in bunkers could feel the tremors through kilometers of rock. as if the heavens themselves were groaning. In one shelter on Mars, a boy whispered to his father, "Are we going to die like the stations?" The father didn't answer, because what answer could he give? The Dominion fleet didn't hesitate. Their doctrine was simple. Terror breaks faster than armor. They raked orbital yards, shattered cargo lines, and smashed habitats that had never once held a gun. To them, it wasn't cruelty, it was efficiency. But for humanity, every flash of wreckage was gasoline on a fire that had already been lit. Workers in the belt stopped hiding and started hunting. Crews in Europa's pits tore into frozen caches and dragged out weapons older than they were. Civilians tuned into the battered comm-nets not to wail, but to snarl, "Don't let this be for nothing." In the Revenant's pit, O'Malley's voice came again, softer this time, but no less sharp. "Sir, they're tearing us apart. If we wait too long, there won't be anyone left to save." Valan didn't answer at first. He just watched the tactical plot where red arcs fell toward Earth. His jaw flexed, once, twice. Then he muttered, "Better a few thousand now than everyone, forever." The bridge crew didn't like it. You could taste the bitterness in the air, but none of them contradicted him again. They knew, painfully, that he was right. Minutes bled into hours, and the blood in orbit only grew thicker. Salvage crews were reduced to scooping drifting bodies with nets. Colonists sealed themselves into crawl spaces and prayed their oxygen held. And still the Dominion kept burning, certain they'd cracked humanity's will. What they didn't see, what their arrogance wouldn't let them see, was that every second they spent playing butcher was another second the trap closed tighter. The mines reset. The echoes multiplied. The rail batteries cooled for another strike. And Valan stood on his bridge, hearing every scream, watching every fall, and holding the line inside his chest like it was the only thing left keeping Earth alive. Because if he broke now, if he struck back too early, humanity's first real chance at victory would burn alongside the habitats. So he let the blood run, and he carried it like chains. The Dominion thought they were clever. Big fleet, perfect formation, engines burning like a wall of suns, rolling forward like they owned the system. They'd cracked stations, slaughtered civilians, and figured the rest of us would fold. But the belt wasn't empty. It had teeth. It started small, with the first flickers. One of their destroyers reported multiple drive signatures skimming the rocks. Then another claimed it had spotted a cruiser lurking on long-range scans. Varun's lieutenants barked at each other in their guttural tongue, sensors combing hard, and then, bam! Plasma lances roared out into the dark, burning chunks of rock the size of apartment blocks into molten vapor. Except nothing. Screamed. Nothing exploded. No human ships caught in the fire. Just silence. Then echoes. Then another phantom signature on the far side of the field. "Sir," Pike said, his voice thick with satisfaction, "the ghosts are dancing." On Revenant's bridge, Valan allowed himself the smallest nod. They weren't real ships, not even close. Just battered old emitters buried in rock. Reactor echo beacons that hummed a pattern similar enough to a human drive that Dominion sensors couldn't tell the difference at combat range. Crude, imperfect. But in a storm of debris and plasma, it didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to look real enough to waste the enemy's fire. And waste it they did. Destroyers broke formation chasing shadows. Escorts peeled off to intercept what turned out to be rocks with metal spines glued inside. In one stretch, Dominion gunners expended more ordnance on a cluster of empty emitters than on any real human vessel that day. You could almost hear the frustration boiling through their comm discipline, like wolves snapping at ghosts in the fog. That's when the torpedo boats struck. They weren't pretty ships, more like tubes with engines and warheads bolted on, but they were fast, and they knew the belt like no Dominion captain ever could. They skimmed close to the rocks, engines masked by the very clutter the enemy despised, until they were practically under the destroyer's noses. "Boat Group 3, firing spread," came the crackle across the net. 6 warheads streaked out from the shadow of an asteroid, each one burning bright as it cut the void. The Dominion destroyer barely had time to roll. 3 detonations punched straight into its flank, peeling armor like fruit skin. One engine flared, sputtered, and died. The ship drifted, bleeding atmosphere, until its reactor lit the black with a funeral blossom. The belt went wild with cheers. But no ambush in space lasts long. The Dominion learned fast. By the time the second squadron of boats pulled their trick, the escorts had already snapped back in close. Their plasma nets lit up half the rocks, carving through mines, beacons, and unlucky boats alike. Boat 5 lost! Boat 7 lost! The joy turned sour in seconds. On Revenant's display, red blips winked out one by one. Whole crews gone in silence. No time for last words, no time for heroics. Just here, then gone, swallowed by the black. Valen gripped the console edge until his knuckles whitened. Every loss hit like a hammer, but he didn't flinch. Couldn't. This was the price of ghosts. Still, the damage was done. The Dominion line staggered. Half their ordnance had gone into shadows. A quarter of their escorts were gone, ambushed in places they thought were safe. And now, instead of pushing confidently into the inner system, their formation crawled, hesitant, second-guessing every ping and echo. O'Malley leaned back in his chair, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. "We're bleeding them, sir. Slowly, sure, but it's working." Valen's reply was grim. "It'll only work as long as they don't realize how crude the trick is. Once they spot the seams, the ghosts vanish." "And the boats?" Pike asked quietly. Valen's eyes flickered to the tactical plot, where another 3 blips had just winked out. "The boats will keep bleeding, and every one of them knows it." Down in the belt, the surviving torpedo crews reset for another run. Men strapped into tight metal coffins, breathing recycled sweat and grease, whispering to each other about the ones who didn't come back. One captain, voice hoarse, said over the channel, "They died making ghosts real. We keep dancing till the bastards are blind." And so they did. Phantoms flitted through the rocks. Dominion gunners fired at shadows. Real ships struck from nowhere and then vanished again. For every destroyer gutted, a torpedo boat burned. For every squadron thrown into chaos, another crew didn't make it home. From Earth, from Mars, from the shelters of the moons, civilians could see the flashes in the night sky. They didn't know what was real or fake, but rumor spread fast. Some whispered, "We've got an invisible fleet. They're fighting back up there." Maybe it wasn't true, not the way they imagined, but it didn't matter. The Dominion wanted humanity broken. Instead, the people hiding underground whispered about ghosts among the rocks, about defenders the aliens couldn't see, couldn't kill, couldn't crush. And if you listened close on the belt's comm channels, you could hear the voices of the living, carrying the names of the dead forward like torches. The ghosts weren't just echoes. They were promises. The ghosts had bought time. Barely. But time wasn't enough. Not when the Dominion still had more hulls than we had bullets. That's when Valen played his next card. The thing about Europa, everyone thought its mining pits and cracked ice caverns were dead, stripped of value decades ago. Dominion scouts sure as hell thought so. They scanned the place, saw a few heat blooms that looked like collapsed outposts, and moved on. Arrogance will kill you faster than plasma. Because under that ice, buried so deep even human governments pretended it was decommissioned infrastructure, were the bones of giants. Colony ships, half-built frames from the expansion age, hulks the size of cities, welded together in secret when Earth thought it might need to throw whole populations out into the dark. The projects collapsed, funding dried up, and the ice claimed them. Everyone assumed they'd been forgotten, not Valen. On Revenant's bridge, he leaned over the plot, voice low but steady. "Wake the Leviathans." A ripple of silence ran through the crew. Everyone knew the whispers, the half-myths about monsters under Europa. But to hear it ordered now, it made the room colder than vacuum. Engines groaned beneath miles of ice. Metal that hadn't felt a current in 2 centuries shuddered awake. One by one, the giants pushed against their frozen tombs, ice fracturing in kilometer-long cracks, geysers venting into the void. The first Leviathan wasn't graceful. Hell, it barely moved in a straight line. Its hull was mottled with rust, patch-welded scars, scaffolding still clinging like ribs, but bristling from its spine were plasma batteries, modern ones, quietly installed across years of maintenance budgets nobody asked too many questions about. The Dominion didn't notice at first. Their attention was on the belt, still clawing at ghosts. Then the ice split wide, and a shadow larger than any cruiser they'd ever seen lurched free. "Contact!" shouted Pike, eyes wide. Oh my God, it's moving!" The Leviathan turned, engines coughing, plasma batteries humming to life. The sound on Revenant's bridge was eerie, like a cathedral waking up. And then, with a roar that made the comms crackle, the first broadside fired. Blue fire carved across the void and smashed into a Dominion heavy cruiser. The alien ship's shields flared, held for half a heartbeat, then failed like wet paper. The Leviathan's shots tore through its midsection, splitting decks and sending fire blooming in every direction. The cruiser twisted, belched atmosphere, and went dark. Silence followed. Even the Dominion seemed stunned. Then the channels erupted, panic, disbelief, the guttural snarl of commanders demanding answers. To them, humanity had just raised a ghost bigger than their nightmares. Varun's voice cut through the static in their tongue, raw with fury. "What trick is this?" On Revenant, O'Malley grinned through the sweat. "Not a trick, you bastard. A monster." But the Leviathans weren't warships. Not really. They were patched-up corpses given a second life. The first one fired again, slower this time, its systems already screaming in protest. Panels burst inside its control deck. Men burned alive as they tried to hold the beast together. Valen knew the truth. They wouldn't last, not without tearing themselves apart. But one good broadside from each was enough to make the Dominion hesitate, and hesitation was survival. The second Leviathan broke the ice minutes later. This one still had scaffolds bolted to its hull, huge arms of steel dangling loose as it rolled upright. Its guns lit up, spitting fire into the flank of a Dominion escort line, crippling 2 ships before it even steadied course. "Jesus," Pike muttered. "They're barely holding together." "That's the point," Valen replied. "They don't have to hold forever. They just have to keep dying louder than we do." The Dominion scrambled. Cruisers broke formation to target the hulks, pouring plasma into the rusted beasts. One Leviathan's flank peeled open like a wound, its insides venting in a glowing stream of debris. But even dying, it kept firing, ripping apart another Dominion cruiser before its reactor blew. And when it blew, oh, it was something to see. The explosion carved a new scar into Europa's ice, a fountain of fire frozen in the dark. The Dominion fleet rocked under the shockwave, shields flaring against debris that pelted them like meteor storms. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't just hiding in the rocks, throwing shadows. Humanity had monsters under the ice. Hulks they were willing to bleed for, burn for, unleash, even if it meant dragging half the system down with them. Back on Earth, the news lit fires of its own. Colonists, refugees, survivors in bunkers. They all saw the feeds. The first images of the hulks clawing out of Europa spread faster than any official broadcast. The whispers changed. "We've got ships bigger than theirs. We've been building them all along." The giants under the ice woke up. Morale wasn't just climbing, it was exploding. The Dominion had meant to terrify. Instead, they found themselves staring at humanity's half-dead gods rising from the grave. On Revenant's bridge, Pike leaned back, breathless. "Sir, they didn't expect this." Valen's answer was quiet, but the steel was there. Nobody ever expects the dead to fight back. The hulks shuddered, fired, and burned, each one writing its death song in plasma arcs and twisted wreckage. And in Dominion command, Vorun's mask of arrogance cracked. For the first time, he saw not prey, not a broken people, but something far more dangerous. He saw desperation with teeth. The Leviathans bought us a gasp of air. Just a gasp. Because the Dominion? They don't take humiliation lightly. You crack one of their cruisers in half with a rust bucket zombie ship. They don't sit back and scratch their heads. No, they double down hard. And that's exactly what they did. The moment Varun's heavy cruiser went dark, the Dominion Armada shifted gears. You could feel it in the void, like a predator shaking off a sting and deciding it's done playing. Their system crackers, those kilometer-long executioners we'd all been pretending weren't inching closer? Yeah, they started burning hot, pushing into low approach vectors straight for Earth. Every civilian feed caught it. The sky was littered with falling sparks, stations, habitats, colonies, whole lives burning up on re-entry. You didn't need military analysis to see it. Just look out a damn window. Pike's knuckles went white over the comm rails. They're going for the planet. Sir, we can't. I see it, Valen cut him off, voice flat but cold. His eyes stayed on the main display where the Dominion formation looked like a tightening noose. And the numbers? The death toll was spiking. Civilians screaming over open channels as habitats cracked apart, their oxygen venting into nothing. People clawing for escape pods that weren't there. It wasn't war anymore. It was slaughter. That's when the crew started whispering the unthinkable. Send the Hulks in. Just ram them. Take the bastards down with us. They're dying anyway, let's make it count. No one wanted to say it out loud, but you could hear it in every strained voice. Those Leviathans, they weren't built to last. They were already tearing themselves apart, each shot burning through reactors that hadn't been inspected since our great-grandparents were kids. Pike finally snapped, slamming a fist against the console. They're coffins anyway. Let's light them up and shove them right down the Dominion's throat. The bridge went silent. Every pair of eyes turned to Valen. He didn't answer right away. Just stood there, jaw tight, gaze locked on the massive alien ships moving closer to Earth. His face was unreadable, but his silence said enough. He'd thought of it too. Finally he spoke. Calm, brutally honest. We may not all come back. And that landed like a blade. Because it wasn't just about the Hulks anymore. He was talking about the next move, the one nobody wanted to name. Phase insertion strikes. The phrase alone was enough to make stomachs drop. It wasn't clean combat. It wasn't railguns at range or torpedoes slipping through formations. It was taking a ship, your ship, and hurling it into the teeth of the enemy's fire to shove a payload exactly where it hurt most. Suicidal in every way except the paperwork. You're saying, Pike started, but Valen cut him off with a raised hand. I'm saying this. We can't sit here and wait while they gut the planet. The Leviathans bought us time, but they'll burn out before the hour's done. If we're going to stop those system crackers, we'll have to do it up close, inside their formation. The room went cold. Nobody breathed. You mean phase insertion? O'Malley said finally, voice low. Valen nodded once. The weight of it settled in. Everyone on Revenant knew what that meant. Get in close. Survive long enough to punch through the Dominion screens. Ram a warhead into the guts of one of those system crackers and pray you lived long enough to see the light fade. Suicide runs. Nothing less. The arguments came fast and sharp. Pike wanted to throw the Hulks in first, make the bastards flinch. Others argued that wasting the Hulks too early would tip our hand. Valen just listened, quiet, letting them vent. He knew the truth. This wasn't about strategy alone. This was about preparing his people to stare death in the face and not blink. Finally, he raised his voice, cutting through the chaos. You think they'll stop if we wait? You think mercy's in their playbook? Look outside. They're already burning everything we love. If phase insertion is what it takes, then that's what it takes. But make no mistake, this isn't just about killing Dominion ships. It's about showing them that no matter what they throw at us, we'll claw back and bleed them for every inch. A silence fell. And then, almost like an oath, O'Malley said, Then let's make 'em bleed. The bridge crew straightened, faces pale but set, because the truth was, there was no clean path left. The Dominion had pushed too close, killed too many. The line had already been crossed. Now it wasn't about survival. It was about making the invaders regret. On the feeds, more colonies burned. Flames streaked the atmosphere, ash trailing behind dead cities. But in that moment, aboard the Revenant, something hardened. A resolve. A grim, ugly fire that the Dominion had no word for. The decision was made. Phase insertion strikes would be prepared. Hulks, torpedo boats, anything that could carry a warhead. They would throw every ghost, every relic, every half-dead ship into the maw until even the Dominion understood. Humanity wasn't going quietly. Valen's voice was the last thing anyone heard before the alarm shrieked again. Mark my words, we may not all come back, but those bastards won't forget us. And with that, the firestorm truly began. You could feel it in your teeth when the Egerons spooled up for the jump. The whole hull of that old carrier rattled like a dying engine block. Lights flickering, bulkheads groaning under the strain. Phase insertion wasn't meant for something her size. Hell, she wasn't meant for much of anything anymore. Half her guts were patched with scavenged steel from orbital scrapyards. But today, she was a spear, and she was aimed right at the heart of the Dominion Armada. Valen stood braced against the forward rail as the countdown rolled. His voice was steady, calm, almost too calm. Hold on to something. Egeron's about to do something no sane ship should ever do. And then the universe folded. It was like being ripped through a keyhole sideways. Every atom screaming, every nerve firing blind panic, until suddenly, bam, the black was gone, and Egeron was right there, a knife's edge from the Dominion flagship's flank. So close you could see the alien hull's scars ripple across your viewport, strange glyphs pulsing with reactor heat. Contact, contact, O'Malley shouted, because of course the enemy noticed. The flagship's guns rotated like angry eyes, already locking onto Egeron's bulk. But the Marines were already moving. The phase insertion strike wasn't just about getting the carrier close, it was about putting boots directly inside the monster. The first wave blinked in a scatter of blue-white arcs, 1 second standing on Egeron's deck. The next dumped in the Dominion's engineering quarters, the air filled with the stink of burned metal and alien oils. And then all hell broke loose. The Dominion guards were waiting, hulking things in segmented armor, weapons that spat molten shards like lightning. The first dozen Marines went down in no unarmed seconds, armor sparking, screams cut short as plasma tore through flesh. But the survivors? They didn't hesitate. Shotguns barked, rifles hummed, grenades bounced down the curving alien halls. Blood, red and blue alike, splashed across reactor conduits. Push! Push! Damn you! Sergeant Kren bellowed, dragging a wounded man up with one hand while his other fired point blank into an alien's chest. The corridors became choke points, meat grinders. Every inch cost lives. Marines hugged walls slick with gore, firing blind around corners just to keep the enemy pinned. More than once, Dominion soldiers countercharged, blades drawn, and the fighting got close and ugly. Knife grips, buttstocks, broken helmets cracking skulls. Half the team never made it past the second junction, but the others, they pushed on, because the objective wasn't to win a firefight, it was to gut the beast. Finally, they broke into the flagship's core. The engineering deck loomed massive, alien reactors pulsing with steady, ominous light. The noise alone was like standing inside a hurricane, metal groaning, energy surging, a constant bass hum that made your bones rattle. Kren wiped blood from his face and laughed, wild and broken. Well, boys, this is it. Let's ruin their day. Charges went down fast, mag locked to conduits, slipped into coolant junctions, strapped along reactor feeds. No finesse, just pure sabotage. Every Marine knew they wouldn't walk out alive, not with that much Dominion fury between them and the extraction point. But they set those charges like priests at an altar, hands steady, eyes grim. The Dominion realized what was happening too late. Reinforcements poured in, alien boots pounding, weapons spitting arcs of death. Marines held the line in a desperate ring, every shot buying another second to finish the job. Bodies piled, voices cut out mid-curse, and then the last detonator clicked green. Kren to command, the sergeant said, breath ragged, his armor scorched and cracked. Package is gift-wrapped. Light it when ready. A beat of silence. Then Valen's voice came back over comms, steady as stone. Understood. You've done enough. Stand by. But Kren wasn't standing by. He laughed, bitter and proud all at once. Nah, sir. We'll hold the door a little longer. Make sure your people get clear. The comm cut off in static as another barrage ripped through the chamber. From Revenant's vantage, it was a sight you never forgot. The Dominion flagship shuddered, light across its hull dimming in stutters. Weapons went cold for a heartbeat, then flared again, except wrong, unstable, like the whole beast was choking on its own heart. "Reactors destabilizing," Pike shouted, eyes wide on the readouts. On the view screen, the flagship convulsed, sections of its armor blistering outward as containment failed. Energy spilled like molten veins, running jagged cracks across the hull. And then, the core went. The explosion wasn't fire. It was light, pure, and brutal, blooming out of the Dominion's proudest ship like a dying star. Shockwaves tore through escorts clustered too close, ripping them apart, scattering debris across the void. The Revenant's crew cheered and cried at once. It wasn't victory. Hell, half their people were still dead in that inferno. But it was something the Dominion couldn't erase. Their flagship crippled by a handful of humans who refused to go quietly. On the comm, silence held for a long moment. Then Valen spoke, voice low but steady, the words hanging heavy across every channel. "They bled for this. Remember it." And out there in the burning dark, the Dominion finally learned what it cost to corner humanity. The Dominion flagship's death didn't just echo across the void, it roared. That shockwave came screaming out like an invisible fist, smashing everything in reach. Escorts too close to the blast went cartwheeling in fireballs, hulls snapping like dry sticks. Dominion formations that had looked perfect, clean, untouchable. Suddenly they were a tangle of burning wrecks, stragglers tumbling end over end as their systems fried. On the Revenant's deck, you could feel it in your gut, the way the whole crew went silent for half a beat, then erupted like someone had ripped the cork out of a bottle. "They did it!" someone yelled, nobody knew who. "The Marines! They actually did it!" Even Valen cracked the faintest smile, and that man wore stoicism like armor. He let the cheer ride for a second, just long enough to burn into memory. Then his voice cut sharp across comms. "Enjoy it later. Right now, they're vulnerable. Pike, line us up on that cruiser. Helm, bring us about, fast." And just like that, adrenaline flipped into action. Revenant lunged forward, flanking guns barking. Plasma bolts stitched across the nearest Dominion destroyer's hull, carving molten lines until the thing broke apart in a cascade of fire. Two escorts followed, human frigates sweeping in like wolves at the kill, torpedoes slamming home and peeling another alien ship wide open. It wasn't clean, it was savage. The Dominion was supposed to be the apex predator here. Perfect formations, overwhelming numbers, doctrine drilled into their bones. But the second their centerpiece went up in fire, that neat doctrine cracked. Half the escorts pulled inward like scared animals, trying to shield the crippled hulks still drifting. Others scattered outward, paranoid at shadows in the dark. "Look at 'em," O'Malley said, laughing through the comm static. "Don't even know who's in charge anymore. Like headless chickens with railguns." It wasn't wrong. Revenant's cannons hammered again, slamming into a battleship already listing from the blast. For a second, the alien vessel tried to answer, plasma arcs flaring, but its fire came late, sloppy, wide of target. Revenant's shots gutted it stem to stern. The ship cracked down the middle like a dropped egg, both halves spinning into the void. The bridge shook as another escort took a glancing hit meant for them. Sparks rained down. Someone swore and kicked a dead console back to life. The victory high was already fading into the hard cost. Everyone knew what it took to get here. Hundreds of Marines gone, their lives spent ripping open that flagship's heart. The cheers on Revenant's deck came sharp, but they were hollow too, like people laughing at a funeral just to keep from collapsing. Valen didn't waste words. He just looked at the tactical display, the Dominion icons flickering as damaged ships bled power, and said, "Press them. Every inch they give, take it. Don't stop." So they didn't. The human flotilla swept forward, striking fast, striking mean. Torpedo boats darted from rock shadows, launching spreads into escorts still trying to regroup. Old lunar silos lit up again, hurling rail slugs across the void with brutal precision. Even the rusting hulks from Europa lumbered forward, belching plasma like dying dragons, forcing the Dominion to waste precious fire knocking them back. Every move chained into the next. Every blow staggered the enemy a little more. And the best part, the Dominion didn't know how to react. These were supposed to be cold, ruthless conquerors, every battle drilled and rehearsed. But this wasn't in their playbook. Their doctrine depended on shock and awe, on overwhelming prey until it curled up and waited to die. They'd never had to fight prey that bit back like rabid dogs, tearing chunks out of their pride and turning it into weapons. One Dominion captain tried to rally a squadron, pulling his ships into a neat wall formation. Revenant tore through it in 30 seconds flat, gunning one escort down, crippling another, leaving the rest scattered in panic. "Keep shooting," Pike barked, sweat streaking down his face. "Don't let up." The void lit up like a graveyard on fire. Burning hulks drifting, fragments tumbling, silent bodies frozen in broken cockpits. But every time a Dominion ship went down, the cheers felt thinner, because everyone knew every human victory was paid in blood. Frigates burning, torpedo boats silent, crews that wouldn't answer comms anymore. "Sir," O'Malley said quieter now, "our reserves are dry. If they regroup, we're screwed." Valen didn't flinch. "Then we don't give them the chance." He leaned in, eyes cold, voice carrying across the battered bridge. "They think doctrine wins wars. They're wrong. Survival does." The Dominion couldn't see it yet, but the cracks were spreading, not just in their ships, but in their confidence, in their arrogance. And for the first time, humanity saw it too. The Dominion still thought they could claw their way back, even after losing their flagship, even after watching half their need. Little doctrine collapsed into burning wreckage. They still had numbers. Hundreds of warships still floated in Sol's skies, more than enough to crush humanity 10 times over. On paper, and they weren't about to slink away without trying to prove it. Problem for them, they didn't realize the paper had teeth. Revenant and her battered pack drifted into the belt, pulling Dominion hounds after them. Valen didn't say much, just that same deadpan order he'd given a dozen times since this started: "Bring them where we want them." And the Dominion followed, like wolves chasing a wounded deer. Only the deer had dug pits and lined them with spikes. The first one hit like a sucker punch. A Dominion destroyer cut between two drifting rocks, sensors pinging a phantom signature ahead. Except it wasn't a phantom at all. It was an old fuel depot, gutted and rigged with a reactor core stripped down to its last unstable heartbeat. The second the alien ship lit it up with a probing shot, the whole depot went up like a miniature sun. Half the destroyer just vanished. The other half spun into the rocks, spewing fire, crumpling like paper under a boot. "Jesus," O'Malley muttered on Revenant's deck, eyes wide as the shockwave rattled their hull. "That's one way to recycle." It was only the beginning. Every path the Dominion took through that belt had been salted years ago. Not perfect traps, not clean ones, but enough. Mines tucked into rock fissures, holes of old outposts wired to blow at the slightest EM tickle. Even asteroid cores stuffed with jury-rigged explosives, waiting for someone dumb enough to graze them with a plasma arc. And the Dominion? They weren't careful. They were angry, sloppy. Another squadron dove after what they thought was a human torpedo boat, chased it around a ridge, only to plow nose first into a minefield disguised as a scatter of ordinary rock chunks. The first explosion gutted their lead ship. The chain reaction that followed turned the rest into scrap, shrapnel ripping outward until the survivors started shooting at each other, thinking the blasts were more tricks. You could almost taste the confusion bleeding into their comms chatter, garbled signals, captains shouting over each other, demands for fire discipline drowned under screams. And through it all, Revenant and her escorts darted like sharks, always just close enough to keep the Dominion chasing, never close enough to get pinned. "Sir," Pike said, voice sharp, "they're tearing themselves apart in there." Valen's jaw tightened, eyes locked on the tactical display as more red blips winked out in the mess. "Good. Keep them guessing. Every shot wasted on Phantoms is one they don't fire at us." And oh, did they waste shots? The Mirage decoys were good enough to fool Dominion sensors on a calm day. But in the belt, with debris bouncing signals, wreckage throwing off heat, and half their fleet already paranoid from ghost strikes, the aliens couldn't tell friend from foe. One cruiser fired a full broadside into what it thought was a lurking human destroyer, only to rip straight through a sister ship limping across its bow. Plasma sheared the ally clean in half, Atmosphere boiling out. Hundreds of Dominion crew sucked into the black. O'Malley just barked a laugh. Hell, we don't even need to fight. They're doing it for us. It wasn't all one-sided. The Dominion still landed punches. A human frigate darting too close got tagged by a lucky volley, torn apart before it could peel away. A torpedo boat got caught in its own minefield chain reaction, swallowed in the chaos it helped trigger. The belt didn't care who bled. It shredded both sides if they weren't careful. But the Dominion bled worse, because they didn't know the terrain, didn't know which junk had teeth, didn't know that half the broken stations they mocked were just waiting for some idiot to trip the wire. On Revenant's deck, the crew started murmuring what everyone was thinking, but no one dared to say too loud. This might actually work. The kill zone wasn't pretty. It wasn't clean. It was messy, desperate, ugly as hell. But it was working. Velan stood with arms folded, watching another Dominion icon flicker and die on the board. His voice stayed steady, like he wasn't even surprised. They thought Earth was soft, thought we'd roll over. All they found is ghosts and graveyards. Out past the belt, the Dominion formations started hesitating. Their captains weren't charging forward now. They were second-guessing, hanging back, arguing with each other in scrambled bursts. Fear, finally, was catching up, and humanity was still standing, bloodied, burned, but standing. The kill fields had done their job. You'd think after watching half their fleet get turned into confetti in the belt, the Dominion would have pulled back, maybe regrouped, maybe even swallowed a little pride. But no, that's not how empires work. Pride is the only language they speak, and pride kept telling them, push forward, break Earth, end it fast. So that's exactly what they tried. The survivors, the cruisers that hadn't blown each other apart, the escorts that somehow dodged the minefields, pulled into tighter formations. Less swagger now, less chasing shadows. Just a big angry wedge aimed straight at Earth. And right in their path? Haven colonies, the little clusters of domes and stations hanging on near Mars like fragile ornaments. You could see the outcome before it even started. The first salvos ripped across those colonies, smashing habitats that had been there for decades. Whole neighborhoods just blinked into fire, domes cracking like eggs, people scrambling through airlocks that wouldn't matter once the atmosphere vented. The screams that came across the emergency channels weren't tactical data. They were raw, panicked. Human fathers calling for kids, miners cursing the void as the walls split. Revenant's bridge went dead quiet. No one cracked a joke. No one even swore. They just listened to thousands of voices die out in static. Valen didn't flinch. He never did. He just stared at the board and finally spoke. Slow them down. Make them bleed for every kilometer. That was the order, and everyone knew what it meant. Deliberate delay. No decisive clash. No clean ambush. Just dragging the fight out, knowing full well it meant trading ships, trading lives, just to buy Earth a little more time to breathe. So the fleet threw itself into the grinder. Small escorts darted in, launching torpedo spreads at the Dominion wedge. They didn't expect to survive. Most didn't. But every second a Dominion cruiser had to wheel around and swat one of them was a second Earth's orbital defenses could brace for impact. It was ugly. The Dominion were disciplined now. No more trigger-happy mistakes. They cut through human frigates like they were paper, each hit lighting up the void with fire and tumbling wreckage. But even so, every burning human hull meant another Dominion ship slowed, another formation broken, another gap punched in that unstoppable wedge. Then came the worst of it, the Valiant. She wasn't just another ship. She was one of the oldest carriers still flying, a symbol as much as a weapon. Half the men and women out here had trained on her decks. She was the kind of ship you thought would always make it home, no matter what, until she didn't. It happened fast. A Dominion system cracker, one of those monstrous ships built to gut entire worlds, swung a broadside her way. Plasma beams stitched across her flanks, and in seconds the Valiant wasn't a carrier anymore. She was a burning coffin, her hangar decks splitting open, fighters spilling out without control, pilots screaming as their birds spun into the dark. "Valiant's hit! Valiant's going down!" someone shouted on Revenant's comms. On the bridge, Pike slammed a fist into his console hard enough to crack the screen. O'Malley just muttered, "God damn it, no." Like saying it softer might change what they were seeing. Valen stood there, jaw tight, watching his display light up with casualty signals. Hundreds lost in minutes. And still, he didn't look away. Didn't let his voice crack when he said, "Mark the sacrifice. Make sure it buys us more than grief." That was it. No grand speech, no false promises, just the reality of it. Those deaths had to mean something, or they'd be wasted. So Revenant pressed forward. She and her battered escorts didn't fight like a fleet anymore. They fought like knives, slashing at a bear's eyes. Hit, retreat, hit again. Anything to stall. Anything to keep the Dominion from rolling over Mars and then swinging straight into Earth's throat. Every second mattered. Every life mattered. But the scale of it was crushing. From the colonies, survivors huddled in shelters sent garbled transmissions. Still alive, still holding, before the next wave of fire cut the signal short. From crippled frigates drifting in the void, last messages bled across the net. Curses, prayers, bitter laughter. One captain signed off with, "At least I'll never pay taxes again," before his reactor went up. It was that kind of night. Knife's edge. That's what it felt like. One wrong move, and humanity slipped right off into the abyss. And through it all, Valen kept them steady. His voice didn't rise, didn't waver. He just gave orders, calm as a surgeon in the middle of a blood-soaked operating room. "Another 30 minutes, he said finally, as if he could bend time by will alone. "Hold them another 30 minutes, and Earth gets a chance." No one argued, no one complained. They just nodded, teeth gritted, knowing damn well 30 minutes could mean another 1,000 lives gone. But they held, because there wasn't any other choice. The Dominion wanted Earth broken. Humanity wanted Earth breathing. And between those two truths was nothing but fire and sacrifice. And the edge of the knife never stopped cutting. By the time 30 minutes bled into 40, something started cracking. Not in us, but in them. The Dominion had always fought like a machine. Predictable, polished, doctrine drilled into them so deep that you could set a clock to their maneuvers. That's what made them terrifying. No hesitation, no improvisation, just cold, perfect slaughter. Except now, they hesitated. It started with the reports. You could hear them bleeding across intercepted channels. Garbled, frantic. Nothing like the smug command voices we'd gotten used to. One scout swore they'd seen hundreds of human ships surging out of the asteroid belt. Another said it was just shadows, mines detonating to fake signatures. Then a third report claimed thousands of human vessels had been hiding around Neptune, waiting for the perfect ambush. The contradictions piled up until their comm-net sounded more like a brawl than a command structure. Too many signatures? No, they're ghosts, illusions. They can't have built this many. We're surrounded. That last one was my favorite. Surrounded? Humanity had maybe 24 real ships left that weren't in pieces, and half of those were leaking atmosphere. But to the Dominion, in their panic, it looked like we had an entire phantom armada breathing down their necks. Panic doctrine. That's what we started calling it. See, here's the thing. The Dominion didn't have a doctrine for deception warfare. They never needed one. When you're the empire with the biggest stick, you don't bother writing a playbook for when the ants bite back. And now, the ants weren't just biting, they were clawing, scratching, drawing blood in places the empire didn't think could bleed. So they started, pulling back. Not a full retreat yet, but you could see the fear seeping into the maneuvers. Outer wings that should have been pressing in tightened up, almost collapsing toward the center. Escorts that were supposed to be screening the system crackers started hanging back, twitchy, second-guessing every sensor ping. The human net lit up with laughter. "Look at him twitch!" O'Malley barked from his station, slapping the console like he was watching a prize fight. "Big bad Dominion, and they're jumping at shadows." Even Valen cracked the faintest smile. Just a flicker, but it was there. And down below, in the battered colonies that hadn't been turned to slag yet, word spread fast. Refugees, miners, kids clutching scraps of comm audio. Everybody started whispering the same thing. The invisible fleet. It was a myth born in real time. People needed something to believe in. And right now, the idea that humanity had hidden an entire ghost armada somewhere in the system, that we weren't fighting alone, lit a fire in them. The invisible fleet will save us. That's what one survivor broadcast out of Ceres before the signal cut. You could practically hear people clinging to it, like the belief itself was armor. The Dominion didn't know it, but they just handed us a weapon better than plasma cannons. Their own fear. Because the moment your enemy starts doubting their sensors, starts arguing with each other about what's real and what's not, the battle's halfway won. Doesn't matter if you've actually got the firepower. If they believe you do, every move they make is poisoned with hesitation. Revenant didn't let that moment go to waste. Valen leaned over the tactical display, voice low and certain. Fan the flames, feed the myth. So we did. Decoy buoys were lit up in patterns designed to mimic entire task groups. Old reactors on abandoned stations were overdriven until they screamed like battleship cores. Mines were detonated in perfect formation arcs, simulating torpedo spreads from fleets that didn't exist. The Dominion snapped at every one of them. Plasma barrages wasted into empty space. Escorts broke formation to chase sensor ghosts. More shouting on their comms. Why didn't we detect this buildup? How can they cloak entire fleets? They were unraveling, and you could feel it. Didn't mean it was easy on us, though. For every clever trick, another real human ship burned. For every Dominion escort that spun out in paranoia, another colony vented to vacuum. This wasn't clean. It wasn't glorious. It was survival, ugly and raw. But survival's enough. That night in the void, I swear, you could almost hear the balance tilt. Not because we were stronger, not because we'd suddenly outgunned the bastards, but because for the first time since their armada dropped into Seoul, the Dominion weren't sure of themselves. And once that doubt sinks in, it doesn't let go. Knife's Edge turned into something else entirely. A whisper, a legend, an invisible fleet that didn't exist except in the minds of the enemy. And sometimes, that's all you need. By now, the whole war felt like we were playing with shadows, except the shadows were ours and the giants couldn't tell the difference anymore. After the chaos of the invisible fleet, Valen doubled down. He didn't just want the Dominion scared, he wanted them cornered. And the way you corner something bigger than you trick it into boxing itself in. That's where the Mirage echoes came in. We'd been tossing them around the belt like scraps of meat to hungry wolves, but this time it wasn't random. Every pulse, every phantom contact was calculated, like laying breadcrumbs in the dark. And damned if it didn't work. The Dominion remnants, what was left of their pride after getting their flagship blown apart, started clumping. Their escorts kept tightening their circle, keeping close to the surviving system crackers and command hulks. They thought they were being cautious, smart. In reality, they were walking straight into a funnel. Again, Valen ordered, his tone steady, but you could hear the edge in it. Shift the pulse east by 12 degrees. Make it look like we're massing. The Revenant's comm-tech tapped in the sequence, and out in the void, another ghost fleet appeared. Big, loud, and very fake. The Dominion reacted just like we hoped. Their forward destroyers wheeled around, cutting across to intercept, straight into the overlapping mine zones we'd seeded earlier. A pair of bright blossoms tore open in the black as two of them vanished in fire, and the rest panicked, tightening formation even more. Jesus, someone muttered on our bridge, half laughing. They're bunching up like cattle in a slaughterhouse. And that was exactly the point. We kept feeding them ghosts, reactor flares, false comm chatter, silent pings that made them think we were coordinating fleets behind their lines. Every move they made was a reaction to something that wasn't there. And every time they shifted, the funnel walls closed tighter. By the time they realized what was happening, they were packed so close together their firing arcs overlapped. That's when Valen gave the signal. The Revenant lit off its last Mirage pulse, louder, brighter than anything we'd sent before. To the Dominion, it must have looked like the invisible fleet itself had just decloaked dead ahead. They broke. Plasma lances and missile swarms flew in every direction, and the bastards weren't even aiming at us. They were firing on each other, blind and twitchy, trying to cut down the Phantom Armada before it could close. Escorts shredding escorts, system crackers punching holes into their own pickets. The black lit up like a fireworks show, and none of it had our name on it. We waited. Valan's hand hovered over the railgun. Fire control, not rushing, just watching them chew themselves apart. The tension was unbearable, every instinct screaming to hit them now, finish it before they regrouped. Then his hand dropped. Now, all batteries! The Revenant and every human ship, still limping in formation, opened fire at once. Railguns spat slugs the size of cars, torpedo racks coughed their last warheads, and the hulks from Europa staggered forward belching plasma. The funnel slammed shut. Dominion ships, already half-mad from chasing ghosts, got hammered in the reel. A cruiser went up in a silent blossom of flame. Another tried to peel away, only to run headfirst into a wall of mines we'd been saving for exactly that escape route. The kill zone was total. You could feel the mood shift on the bridge. Not relief yet, not victory, but something close to awe. For the first time, humanity wasn't just surviving. We were dictating the fight. Listen to 'em tear each other apart, O'Malley whispered, eyes wide on his console. Don't listen, Valan cut in, voice flat. Finish it. And we did. Torpedoes ripped through the crippled stragglers. Railgun rounds punched holes clean through their hulls. The Dominion fleet, once a wall of inevitability, was reduced to scattered hulks and friendly fire wrecks spinning helplessly in the dark. The funnel held, and the trap closed exactly the way Valan had drawn it in his head. I'll be honest, part of me didn't believe it even as I watched it happen. We weren't supposed to win fights like this. Humanity wasn't supposed to last this long, and yet here we were, dragging giants into a cage made of smoke and mirrors, then breaking their teeth against the bars. When the last Dominion ship in range finally cracked open, venting flame and wreckage, there was this silence on the bridge. Not the peaceful kind, the stunned kind. The kind where everyone's brain is trying to catch up with what just happened. Then someone let out a shaky laugh. Another slapped the console. By the time the third cheer broke loose, the whole bridge was roaring. Valan didn't cheer. He just stared at the tactical display, the faintest smirk tugging his lips. They'll never live this down, he said quietly, and they'll never forget it. The funnel had worked. We just turned their arrogance, their fear, and their own damn guns against them. And for the first time, the Dominion looked less like gods and more like prey. It didn't hit me all at once that they were actually running. When you've been staring down an armada that blotted out the stars, 40 system crackers, hundreds of escorts, a flagship the size of a floating city, you don't just flip a switch in your head and say, oh yeah, we've got 'em. You wait for the trick, the trap, the sucker punch that's going to take the floor out from under you. But this time, there wasn't one. The Dominion broke. Their flagship was gone, blown apart from the inside by Marines who never came back. 2 system crackers had already gone silent, gutted by the hulks we'd pulled from Europa's ice. And now their formations were unraveling like thread off a spool. At first it looked like panic. Escorts trying to regroup around whatever command hulls were still broadcasting. Then the signals cut, one by one. You could see the cohesion go. A fleet that had spent centuries drilling perfect order was suddenly just ships. Scattered, limping, terrified ships. They're retreating, someone on the Revenant's bridge whispered, like they didn't believe their own words. No, O'Malley muttered, leaning over his scope. They're fleeing. And sure enough, the whole right wing of their formation peeled away in a ragged arc, burning hard for the edge of the system. Half of what was left of the Armada, gone in a single desperate maneuver. The other half hesitated, maybe waiting for orders, maybe just too battered to move. Then they started pulling back too, bleeding plasma trails like wounded animals. The silence on the bridge wasn't triumph. Not yet. It was disbelief. We'd bled for this. The Valiant gone, her wreck spinning somewhere over Mars. Hulks shattered, crews scattered, half our fleet little more than patched together relics. But we were still there, still standing, and they weren't. Valan finally spoke, voice low but carrying. Mark it. The Dominion has broken orbit. Nobody cheered at first, not until the first enemy system cracker blew its drives hot and limped out of range. Then it started. A ragged laugh, a choked sob, A few slaps on the bulkhead like sailors pounding the table in a bar. And once it started, it didn't stop. The bridge roared alive, men and women shouting, fists in the air, some just crying out everything they'd been holding in for days. Me? I just sat back, heart hammering, trying to process the fact that I was still breathing, that Earth was still under our feet, that we hadn't been burned clean off the map. And then the calls started coming in. Colonist channels, civilian relays, scratchy comms from shelters that had gone dark days ago. We're alive. They're leaving. We saw it. The sky lit up. They're gone. Voices breaking with relief, with grief, with that hollow sound people make when the thing that was supposed to kill them just doesn't. On the ground, they saw the wreckage streaking across the sky, burning hulls re-entering atmosphere like falling stars, shattered escorts breaking apart, leaving trails that turned night into bloody daylight. Kids pointing, not even realizing half those fireballs were coffins. Parents just staring, not sure whether to pray or scream. I remember one feed that stuck with me, a miner's family on Luna. Their dome had taken a glancing hit, barely held pressure. They'd been crammed in an emergency shelter for 3 straight days, no food, no idea what was happening. When the bombardment stopped and the Dominion peeled away, they stumbled out under the cracked sky. And there it was, the wreckage of a Dominion cruiser, burning bright as it fell into the horizon. The little girl in the family just whispered, "We scared them." That hit harder than any cheer on the Revenant, because that's what it boiled down to. Humanity, the species that was supposed to fold in hours, the species they thought had nothing but rust and rubble. We'd scared the monsters. Bad enough they left behind their dead and ran. It wasn't clean, though. God, no. The orbital charts looked like a butcher's floor. Hulks drifting, bodies floating, habitats cracked and bleeding air. Every ship we had left was crippled. The Revenant herself had holes you could fly a shuttle through. We'd won, if you could call it that. But the cost was carved into every face on the bridge. Valen stood there in the middle of it all, calm as ever, eyes hard. He didn't celebrate, didn't smile, just said one thing: "They'll be back." And the whole room went quiet again, because we knew he was right. This wasn't the end. Not for them. But it was the first time in history they'd been stopped. The first time the Dominion had come at a world and left with their tails between their legs. And that meant everything. On Earth, people poured out of shelters as the sky burned. Some knelt in prayer. Some just lay down on the ground, laughing through tears as if they couldn't believe the soil was still there to hold them. Others stared up at the trails of fire and whispered names of the dead, hoping the stars carried the words. We watched from orbit, too wrung out to cheer anymore, too beaten to feel anything but bone-deep exhaustion. But inside that exhaustion, under the grief and the rage, there was something new, something dangerous. Hope. The Dominion could bleed. The Dominion could break. And the whole galaxy had just seen it. That night, with the wreckage still falling and the comms clogged with voices of survivors, I sat at my console and realized something I hadn't let myself believe since this started. We weren't done. Not yet. The sky was broken, the world scarred, but humanity was still here. And for the first time, the future didn't look like extinction. It looked like a fight. And I swear, in that moment, watching the stars burn with the corpses of giants, I almost smiled. The sky kept burning long after the last Dominion drive flare vanished. It wasn't a victory parade. It was wreckage coming home. Shattered escorts turned into streaks over the Pacific. Twisted plating rained into the Sahara like black snow. Cities stood outside and watched the night bruise and heal, watched the stars blink wrong, watched the world keep spinning anyway. Earth was scarred, millions gone, but the planet was still under our feet. We were still here. On the Revenant, the silence felt heavier than any bombardment. No alarms, no battle chatter. Just the pop of cooling metal and the thin hiss of atmosphere leaking somewhere it shouldn't. Valen left the bridge without a word and took the lift down to the hangar. It wasn't a hangar anymore. It was a wound with rails and landing lights. The deck was carved with gouges where crash foam hadn't fired, where fighters had skidded and burned. A whole wall was black glass from a plasma blowback. You could see your face in it if you wanted to punish yourself. What was left of 3 squadrons sat like broken teeth, wings snapped, noses crumpled, scorch marks clawed across paint. Between them lay the rows. No speeches, no flags, just canvas, rows and rows of it, each with a helmet laid at the top, some standard issue, some patched civilian vac caps, one Dominion helm with a crack down the center because the man who wore it had earned the right to lay it there. Valen walked the line slow, boots crunching on stray rivets. He didn't rush. He didn't bow his head. He did the thing he knew they would have wanted. He looked each shroud in the face like it was a man standing there, and he saluted. Pike waited near the bulkhead, grease smeared up to his elbows, knuckles scabbed. He didn't try to talk. O'Malley stood beside him with a split lip and the 1,000-yard stare of a guy who has sounded off too many names he'll never hear answer again. "Kren?" Pike asked finally, voice rough. "Held the door till it broke in his hands," Valan said. It wasn't comfort. It was the truth. Pike nodded once and wiped his face with the back of his wrist like he could scrub the war out of it. There was a fighter near the end of the row that didn't look like it belonged. Someone had already started to clean it. One wing panel had been buffed bright, and across it, in grease pencil, you could make out names. 100 at least, layered and lopsided. O'Malley tapped the panel with 2 fingers. "We're, putting 'em up," he said. "Where they'll fly, kind of." "Dumb, I know." "It's not dumb," Valan answered. "It's weight. Keep it." They moved on, past the shrouds, past a stack of helmets that didn't have heads to match, past a torpedo casing someone had dragged in and repurposed as a bench because sitting on explosives felt normal now. Up top, the ship groaned and heeled. If you looked at her with a builder's eye, the Revenant was a miracle made out of stubbornness. 490 meters long, triple rib keel, 20% of plating warped or missing, bow lances cracked at the mounts, port batteries down to 2 working barrels, point defense grid stitched back together from scavenged parts. Any sane officer would have called her a write-off. She still answered helm. She still spit fire. She'd earned the right to look ugly. The lift doors slid open again, and a handful of deckhands stepped in. Kids mostly, one-handed. Valan a rag without meeting his eyes. "Sir, we're, going to keep polishing." "Helps." Valan took the rag, rubbed a streak off a blasted bulkhead, and handed it back. "Good, Ian," he said. "Make her shine someplace." Down on Earth, hatches opened. People trickled out of shelters into streets lined with ash and quiet. A man in Nairobi looked up at the smoke trails and started clapping, slow and off rhythm, until his hands turned red. In Dhaka, a boy climbed onto a rooftop and shouted his brother's name until the neighbors shouted too. Not because they knew the brother, but because the boy's voice sounded like a flag going up. In New Houston, miners in scarred jumpsuits stood shoulder to shoulder on the spaceport apron and listened to nothing for a long time. Then someone said it. "The Ghost Fleet stands." It wasn't a slogan cooked up in some ministry. It just happened. A whisper in a shelter corridor, a hissed line in a triage tent, a scrawl on a cracked wall. The words jumped from city to city, station to station, like sparks catching dry tinder. Soon it wasn't whispered at all. Men on crutches yelled it at the sky. Kids chalked it on pavement. Pilots tapped it into the side of their helmets with a metal pick. One careful letter at a time. The Ghost Fleet stood. Not because we had invisible ships. Half of ours were visible from orbit if you knew where to look. It stood because the ghosts were people. Leviathans that burned themselves out to buy 30 seconds. Torpedo boats that never came home. Marines who didn't. Every trick we pulled, every decoy beacon we lit, every mine wired to scrap, those were built from names. The fleet stood because they stayed standing even when they fell. Word filtered back, too, from the ones who ran. We didn't get their logs. We didn't need them. You could tell from how they started acting. Dominion captains stopped calling us prey. They stopped calling us humans, even. The way their ships flinched away from Legrand's shadows, the way they burned fuel to avoid dead stations, like they were cursed. The way their formations gave our moons more room than their doctrine allowed. You could read the new script in their wake. They branded us in their own heads, unknowable, asymmetric, a problem you don't solve so much as avoid. The story that left Seoul wasn't "we defeated Earth." It was "do not take Earth lightly." Their junk fights back. In empires, fear travels faster than orders. It rewrites doctrine in the time between breaths. Valen went back to the bridge when the ship needed him again. Damage control sang through the decks. Welders turned sparks into stitching. Medtechs worked past exhaustion, hands steady because hands that stop shaking keep hearts beating. On the big pane, Earth rolled. Clouds scuffed. Patchy darkness where cities had gone black. Coastlines still. Seas calm for once. He keyed the wideband and didn't bother dressing the words for history. "This is Commander Darren Valen," he said, voice steady as the hull. "If you can hear me, you lived. We'll count the rest and we'll carry them. If you're looking for orders, here they are. Repair, recover, rebuild. We don't chase the ones who ran today. We make it so if they ever come back, they don't get out again." He let the channel hang open a second longer, listening to the replies pile over each other. Cheers, sobs, static. Someone in a Martian accent promising to weld until his hands fell off. Someone else just repeating, "We're alive," like a spell. Pike leaned in, voice low. "You think they return?" "Of course." Valen's eyes stayed on the planet. "And we'll be ready. The ghost taught us how." O'Malley rubbed his temples, then blew out a breath that sounded like it had been stuck in his chest since the first alarm. "I'm going to sleep on the deck, sir. That okay?" "Best bed on the ship," Valen said. The kid smiled, a cracked thing but real. By dusk, if you could call it that in orbit, a detail mustered on Revenant's spine. Someone produced a ragged flag, burned, edges melted, colors smudged. No ceremony. They tied it off on a bent antenna and let it hang any way it wanted. The battered cloth snapped once in venting air and settled. Down below, columns of survivors walked through streets where windows were gone and doors were broken. They carried stretchers, water, stories, and that line kept rolling across the planet like thunder at walking speed. The Ghost Fleet stands. Not a boast, a vow. Night fell for real. On the far side of the world, fire trails faded to ember. In the hangar, a deckhand finished tracing the last name on the fighter wing and set the grease pencil down like a blade. Valen did one more loop through the rows, one more salute, then went back to the job that never ends. Survival wasn't pretty. It wasn't clean. It was enough. The Dominion would write their new manuals and warn their heirs about Earth. Don't get clever around the rocks. Don't follow heat without asking who lit it. Don't assume the dead stay down. That was our strategic victory, etched not just in wreckage, but in the way our enemies now thought. You can't put that in a kill count, but it sticks longer than steel. The emotional one was smaller, heavier. A father finding his son in a crowd. A pilot waking up and realizing the ship he loved still had a heartbeat. A commander standing on a broken deck, telling himself the names on the wing meant he had to keep waking up tomorrow. The price was terrible. The planet would wear it for generations. But when the tallying stopped and the welders turned off their torches and the med bays dimmed their lights, one truth sat in the middle of the dark, stubborn as a mountain. We were alive. The Ghost Fleet stood, and that was enough. For tonight, and for the next time the sky breaks. If this story of the Ghost Fleet standing gave you chills, smash that subscribe button for more HFY tales where humanity turns the impossible into survival. Now we want to hear from you. If you were standing on Earth that night, watching the wreckage of the Dominion burn across the sky, what would you whisper to the survivors? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where survival itself becomes the ultimate victory. See you in the next story.